So here we have the Kléber is on the right. After my description, can you be surprised? Um, Bonaparte, he fled. He left Egypt. It was a combination of wanting to leave, but also feeling he needed to get back to Paris because he had been cut off by the Directory government and his men had been abandoned by them. His army was a bit like the Afrika Korps under Hitler. They were cut off and abandoned. That's it. They have failed. I don't want to know about them. The same thing happened here. So he received news that there were so many reverses in Italy. The Austrians were moving in. Almost everything he had conquered was being lost. So he said, this is absurd. He went back to France in August 1799. But he did it secretly.
Yeah.
He didn't tell Kleber what he was doing.
Yes.
He actually told Kleber, I shall have a meeting with you at Rosetta at 11 p.m. on this certain night, knowing that he had already taken ship several hours before at Alexandria. So Kleber arrived in Rosetta and found an empty room with a desk and a dossier on it. And in this dossier was a letter saying, Dear General, we have had the campaigns, haven't we? My word, we have driven the ghost of Alexander to shame. Now you are in charge. Kleber apparently let out a roar. He was so enraged by what Bonaparte had done. And the historians at the time, I believe it was either Nicola Turk or Al-Jabati, she said, a roar like an offended camel, because this was the loudest thing they had heard. And Bonaparte was gone. Kleber then became general, and his keen interest was to get his men back home. So there were all sorts of peace negotiations going on towards the end of the next couple of months. Meanwhile, Bonaparte institutes his coup in Paris in October, November. He effectively creates the new consulate. He is the first consul. He becomes Augustus Caesar.
Yeah.
Primus inter pares, first among equals of the three consuls.
Yes.
He now has to try to get his boys back home. He tries to send fleets. It doesn't work. It just doesn't. The British have blockaded Malta. They've blockaded Egypt. Nothing is working. The British go so far as to create a treaty with the Ottomans that Kleber is ready to sign. But it never comes to it because the British admiral at the time, Lord Keith, sent an offensive letter to Kleber, ignoring the treaty, ignoring what the cabinet had said, ignoring what Captain William Sidney Smith had managed to achieve, and it just said, you will lay down your arms in unconditional surrender, forthwith. Kleber took his letter and pinned it, had it copied and pinned on every depot notice board, and said, soldiers of France, we cannot tolerate this. To explain also what's going on, the Ottomans have moved an army, and it's not just any army. It is the army of the levy from the Ottoman Empire, which means it is between 40 to 60,000 men through Sinai. They are on the border. They are within 15, 20 miles of Cairo.
Yeah.
Kleber has barely 9 to 10,000 men. He attacked them at Heliopolis, which is 10 miles outside Old Cairo. He put them to flight. He absolutely routed the entire army.
Yeah.
They were filled mainly with untrained, undisciplined, if you like, militia. Peasants who are holding sticks, some of them unarmed. That's where many of these numbers come from. Whereas the elite, Nizam-i-Jadid, the new model army, who wore their fine scarlet coats and tall fez, and these were the finest troops in the Orient at the time. They could not stem the tide, and the French were so disciplined, they just divided the field and destroyed them. So that was the beginning of the end of the peace. But Kleber himself was assassinated 6 months later And the man on the left took over. And this is General Menu. Menu was, to put it mildly, hated. He was despised by his colleagues. He was a laughingstock to the soldiers. And he basically set the scene for the ultimate destruction of the new French colony.
Who assassinated?
It's actually a very important cultural thing. His name was Suleiman al-Halabi, and that meant at the time Suleiman of Aleppo.
Aleppo, yes.
He was a student of the Al-Azhar Mosque in Cairo. He had been paid, they believe, by Al-Jazar Pasha, who was, it's to explain to English speakers, this basically means the butcher. Al-Jazar was the butcher of Acre, and he was the, if you like, the commissioner in control, the ruler of Sidon and Acre, or Acre, as we would say. They believed that Al-Jazar paid Suleiman secretly to assassinate.
How did he assassinate him?
Kleber was walking in his gardens with his good friend, Protin, an architect, discussing what they were going to do to develop the gardens and the palace. And there, suddenly, was a beggar who was kneeling to the great Kleber, who put his hand up. And it was a common ritual, if you like, of supplication that you offer your hand, and the great man might take it, or indeed kiss it, and give you a blessing.
Yes.
And instead of this, of course, he sprang to attack him with a dagger and plunged it into his chest, his arms, his cheek, everywhere. Just went mad. And then ran. They found him. He ran from rooftop to rooftop, but the Egyptians heard the alarm calls and people were spotting him running till they found him cowering under a bush. They believe he was quite mad or didn't really know his own mind. Possibly he was even made this way by his action, perhaps convinced what he was doing was a good thing, part of jihad. So that was the end of Kleber, and of course the end of the hopes for peace, because Kleber still wanted to get his boys back. But now that was impossible. Menu was in charge, and that was it.
Yep. What do we see here, Jonathan?
So this is one of the pieces I was talking about, the Dendra zodiac, the ceiling of the temple in Dendra on the Nile, drawn by that young fellow, René Edouard de Villiers de Terrage and Prosper Jollois. And this is their drawing of it. As you can see, it's incredibly intricate. If the viewers were to Google the Dendra zodiac now, they would see the actual thing. And if you could put it side by side, you'd see the most extraordinary likeness. It's like a laser photograph. And they did this by pen and ink, by candlelight at night near Karnak, or during the day over a period of weeks. You can imagine. The soldiers were very proud of the young scholars, as they called them. And if a painter stopped to paint an image, the soldiers, any soldier, would stop and give him shade or stand over him to stop the sun getting at him. They really did respect these young people, and some of them were older, of course, too. In fact, the mountain range, the Dolomites, is named after the great geologist Dolomieu, and he was one of the oldest on this expedition.
So when was this created then, approximately?
This drawing would have been done between 1799 and 1800.
Very fascinating.
This is another one of my favorites. One of the first trips out to the Sphinx. And of course, we're all used to photographs of the Sphinx now, but back in 1798, it was up to its neck in sand. It's a peculiar thing to realize, but the first Egyptologist was actually, if I remember correctly, was it Amenhotep? Yes, Thothmes himself was, he did the first excavations that got down to the front legs of the Sphinx. It was believed he had a dream um, that he would become pharaoh, even though he had several brothers before him.
Yeah.
Yet the Sphinx itself promised him, "No, you will be pharaoh." And of course, they were all the princes were died of illness and one killed in an accident. He became pharaoh. As a result, he created a thing, an offering to the Sphinx, which he laid between its feet at his excavations. And this is known as the dream stele. So if you encounter that, you have now found the first Egyptologist. These are the second groups of Egyptologists, and they are measuring absolutely everything they can about the Sphinx. One other little interesting foible here is it's a lovely piece of British propaganda that a Napoleonic cannonball blew off the nose of the Sphinx.
Exactly. I just wanted to point out to that. Yes.
Well, as you can see, there's no British cannonball anywhere soon for another 3 years, yet here they are, and there's no nose. It was believed, there are two possibilities, that it was actually defaced by a fundamentalist in the 10th century, or indeed simple erosion, or indeed perhaps a combination of the two. I can't imagine that a single man could smash away at that Sphinx's nose. You see the size of him on the top there, and the size underneath the chin.
Yes.
In
But
fact,
the second question remains, if he destroys the nose, what about the other facial, I mean, what about the eyes? What about the lips? What about the ears? You know, that's the
exactly, yes.
question remains.
Ironically, the beard of the Sphinx, if I get this right, is in the British Museum too. I thought I certainly saw one of those things there. So you have, these are, if you like, contemporaneous records of what the Sphinx looked like before there was actual combat there. Certainly, they might even have blamed it on Napoleonic cannonball from the Battle of the Pyramids. That might also be the origin of the story, but no. Giza was 16 kilometers away.
Yeah, very good to know. Okay, here we have another view.
That's a lovely, lovely image.
Yeah.
I've actually juxtaposed this with a photograph. It's a very popular angle to take photographs from Egypt tourism. And the accuracy of this drawing is breathtaking.
Unbelievable. Oh, here. Yes.
Okay, so now we have gone through, we are now in March 1801. This is the British D-Day, if you like. This is hitting the beaches at Abu Qir Bay. Now, where the Ottomans landed 15,000 men, the British had 15,000 as well. The first wave went in. In the first 10 minutes, they lost 700 men from the crossfire. They did not stop. When they got to the beach, the guards formed up. A company of cavalry came down to attack them, but they were seen off because the guards were in square formation. Within a shorter while, within hours, there 2,000 men were swarming up the dunes, and the French were, as the expression went, driven off at the point of the bayonet. The British secured their beachhead and they moved inland immediately before they could unload their ships. It was an extraordinary landing, and it was a hot landing. It was received. It was not Omaha Beach necessarily, but it's the same sort of feeling for the time. This was now the beginning of the end for the French. So this particular one is an image, an engraving of the citadel in Cairo. Now it's difficult for people to remember that Cairo is not an ancient capital. Yes, it is the capital of Egypt, but it was not the original capital by any means. It is a medieval town. It was founded in the 11th century. So this citadel was built by none other than Salah ad-Din himself, and it has all the hallmarks of the medieval castle. There are great turreted gates and dungeons, all sorts of things. And this is where the French set up their HQ, their military HQ at the time.
Very interesting. I love this one.
Now, this officer will be from the 1st Cavalry, who were the elite of the French expedition, and they were given the camels and known as les dromadaires. They were the best of the best, in that they could not only charge on horses, they could also charge with camels. And this is the force that harried Murad and the Mamluk cavalry throughout Upper Egypt, trying to catch them and engage them in battle. So there is one source for this entire expedition. It's a Sergeant Francois, and he ends many of his sentences with dramatic sentences or statements with the expression "dit les dromadaires," so say the dromedaries. So he was very proud of the fact he was in the dromedare. And the British eventually had their own. They had the Camel Corps, and they did long desert reconnaissance eventually. But this is les dromadaires.
So it's always a dromedary. It was never a camel, right?
I believe the French word for camel, if someone can correct me, chameau.
Camel, exactly.
Yes. So ironically, the giraffe, if I remember this correctly, is camelopard, a leopard camel. But yes, dromedary, not quite sure why.
Yeah, it's interesting, you know.
I must say.
Yes, very interesting.
Might have been their Latin root name, perhaps, yes.
Yes.
So what we've got here is a French map of the works around Alexandria as the British are approaching. So this is in the memoirs of René-Edouard de Villiers du Terrage. And if you can see that line in there, there is a large, what looks like an earth formation. It's a dike. Effectively, Alexandria was fed by a canal from the Nile. It's not on the Nile. The Nile goes to Rosetta and further over to the east to Damietta, but not to Alexandria anymore. The canal itself was on a very large sea dike. So in fact, it was General Menu who wrote to one of his colonels, gosh, I do hope that during the siege of Alexandria, the British don't realize that they could surround us by cutting that dike. So once the British engineers found this, they then examined the dike and realized, good heavens, he's right. That's the first thing they tried to do. So they did it. And as you can see, written there is coupé par les Anglais, cut by the English, because this was seen as a form of vandalism as well, because what it did was it let seawater into a huge area known as Lake Mareotis, south of Alexandria, or Mariut. It destroyed arable land for the next 10 years, but it enabled the English to get their boats in south of Alexandria. So to explain quickly, strategically, Cairo was cut off on its own, facing Yusuf Pasha and his army. Menu had gone up to meet the English at the Battle of Alexandria and had been defeated. They were buttoned up in Alexandria and closed the gates. So British now had to seal them off and seal off Cairo to split the French forces. And that's exactly what happened. So Menu now refuses to surrender Alexandria. Alexandria is under siege. It is starving. Their food supplies have run out. There are some 12,000 troops in there, as well as all the local inhabitants. And it was not a small town by any means at all. The treaty was extraordinary because Article 16 was the key to it. Yeah. That is, the whole of the treaty is explaining how the French will give up their arms and how they will be allowed to be marched out with honor. However, Article 16, the French will surrender all of those treasures that they have amassed in their time in Egypt, including the Rosetta Stone. Now, Menu believed that because the stone was found at Rosetta, which was his old district as governor of Rosetta before he became General en Chef, he'd taken it from the Institute for his personal keeping. In fact, there was a story that he hid it under his bed. So effectively, nobody knew where the stone was.
These are some megalomaniac people. It's unbelievable.
This is where most of my detective work took place. I had to find out more about the treaty. So here on the right, you have everybody knows his name, but very few people have seen his picture. This is Lord Elgin. Lord Elgin was the British ambassador to the Sultan of Constantinople, to this court. And he had sent his personal secretary to draft the terms of the surrender for Egypt. It was this man, William Richard Hamilton, we don't have a picture of him, who insisted on the stone because that was his orders from London and from Constantinople. If we go to the next picture, it just so happened at the time that passing through Egypt, which was now virtually, Cairo surrendered in June, but Alexandria was holding out. So there are a couple of months of siege. And in Cairo were these two British academics from Cambridge. And this is Dr. Edward Daniel Clarke, a fellow of Jesus College, Cambridge. They were very helpful in my research. And I was very pleased to discover that it was Clarke and his student assistant, John Cripps, PhD student at the time, who heard about what was going on in Alexandria, the stone, and also of some other very, very valuable artifact. They rushed down river to Alexandria and met the commanding officer, Lieutenant General Healy Hutchinson, and said, we know of the artifacts. We know where we have contacts who could show us where these things are. General Hutchinson co-opted them as amateur spies with a passport to go through the gates into the town with specific instructions to find that Rosetta Stone, please. So they did. We now have to understand politically, as you said earlier, the different factions within the group. So in the French lines, you've got the soldiers, you have menus, and you have the savants.
Yes.
Savants have split. There's a terrible rift. In fact, they tried to escape. And this gentleman on the right, this is Sir William Sidney Smith, captain of HMS Tiger, and one of the greatest dashing naval heroes of the period. He actually was more popular than Nelson, and the army loved him, the navy loved him. He was also a Francophile. He liked the savants. He met them. He actually tried to protect them. So it was under his protection that they came to the understanding that the British were not all trying to surrender and steal their things. Clarke, when he went into the town, met them and said, what's happening? He said, the army is going to confiscate our things. We would rather burn them than let your army take our things. So Clarke went back to the commander and said, look, let them keep their collections. These are prized things. Europe will be the better for them. We don't have to take them. So Hutchinson said, by all means. Clarke then went in to tell the savants this, and coincidentally, he received a message through one of his Alexandrian merchants who said, from a savant, meet me at the warehouses near the Western Harbour. So Clarke and his student, John Cripps, and the man who drafted the treaty, William Richard Hamilton, went to the back streets of Alexandria where they met this savant engineer. We don't know his name. He showed him Menu's personal baggage train, and there in a cart, underneath a rug, was the Rosetta Stone. This is the controversy. The British Museum had relied entirely on the hearsay evidence, if you like, of a letter drafted to the Society by a man called Colonel Tompkins Hillgrove Turner. who said essentially he had recovered the stone. He doesn't even mention Clark. Clark, at this point, told his student to alert the general, call in Colonel Turner to come and collect the stone. They brought in a gun carriage, they put the stone on it, and they took it through the streets of Alexandria. The soldiers lining the roads, casting curses and insults upon them as they went. They were very proud of that stone. So the fear was also that if the French found it, the soldiers found it, they might say, well, if we cannot have it, you will not have it, and destroy it, or cast it from the walls. There were all sorts of possibilities. So the savants were afraid Menu was going to take it home and keep it, and it wasn't going to be used for scientific research. But they knew that if the English scholars took it, that at least somehow they would have access to it. So the subtitle for my original book was The Sword and the Stone, because in a way there was a battle between the armies and the academics here. And in the end, luckily, the academics won. But of course, they won with the help of the armies. And it was taken from Alexandria out to my marine and the docks, ready to be taken away after the surrender. And that was the end of the French colony in September 1801.
Yes.
So here we see this as an example of the terrain around Alexandria that the English troops were encountering as they made their way there.
Interesting.
Now, this is a lovely portrait. We've seen the full-scale one, but this was what Clark called ad vitam. This was from life. This, as you can see, is General Menu. Now, with everyone starving around him, I always notice the fact he looks very, very well fed. I don't know if you'd agree, but this was possibly one of the reasons he was just so unpopular.
He doesn't have a chin anymore. Look at that.
No.
His name was Jacques Abdullah Menu.
Right. Now, this is an interesting point. He curried favor with Bonaparte in the first months of arriving in Egypt by converting to Islam. So he took the name Abdallah and from then on became the absolute butt of jokes to every other general in the staff. In fact, he married the daughter of the local bathhouse keeper, and her name was Zobeida. His old friend Marmont actually said, "Will you be taking 4 wives?" Which I understand is the norm. And Menu wrote back, "No, I shall not be taking 4. Thank you very much. Zobeida is quite enough to me." So we don't know whether he prayed 5 times a day, but he certainly, when he is discussed by Clark, in Alexandria, he's not in a house, he's in a tent. And he has a screen in his tent beyond which his wife and his harem is located. So his wife and perhaps her sisters and handmaidens and so forth, her staff. So it must have been a very large tent indeed. And the ship's setting sail to leave Alexandria.
Yes.
Now, what I discovered was Colonel Turner may not have actually recovered the stone,
Yes.
but he quite likely took the stone on another frigate. So my marine mentioned HMS Madras, and it brought home the bulk of the statuary, which was all, you have to understand, they all had tags on them from various French officers who believed that they were theirs and they were going to take them home as souvenirs. So it took a while to amass all these.
Yes.
And that stuff went on the Madras, but the Madras had to stop at Malta for repairs because it was very, very slow and falling apart. So it's possible its hull was badly riddled with weed and worm and so forth. But the HMS Egyptian, which was the English name of the captured French frigate L'Egyptienne, made it to London with the Rosetta Stone.
Yes. That's right.
And it reached London in February 1802.
1802. Okay.
Yes, so here we are. This is the British Museum.
Yes.
The stone did not go first to the museum. It went first to the Society of Antiquaries of London, which is based at Somerset House, which is the old Public Records Office in London. But then after some study, it was then released to the museum same time as 50 tons of statuary was brought from Egypt and arrived in that street outside the gates of the museum. Now, the museum, you have to remember, had very small items on display. It had no large statuary, really, at all. So what you see in the Egypt room, the giant fist of Memphis, the huge head of Amenhotep, these things are on that list by that Royal Marine and were brought in by horse and carriage right there outside that portico on that day. And you can go around the Egypt room with that list and tick them off as you see them. It's quite extraordinary. It's chilling. It's as if they arrived yesterday.
Unbelievable.